I want to talk to Jamal. Jamal is coming out of California, and he asks, or he says, there's historical and scientific evidence for God. You're on AXP with Dave and Johnny. What is the historical and scientific evidence from God? Because I haven't heard it, and I want to hear it.
All ears.
All ears. Yeah.
How are you all doing? First of all,
Hey,
Great.
Jamal.
How are you?
So okay. So for you two gentlemen, if I provide you information that is, and this information has been deemed accurate and factual, and it's a lot of information. It's been deemed factual 100% of the time. Okay, and there's a few information that has not been I presented to you, but it's not. It's just so complex that it's not knowledgeable enough for you to for people or even scientists to say, you know what, this is actual. It's just not yet, but it will happen. There will be a time presented itself. Would you say, you know what, I'm going to follow this? I think this is going to be, because the first 80% of it that you gave me was 100% factual, and the remaining 20%, I'm sure it's going to be factual because the first part was already factual.
This is increasingly hypothetical, Jamal. Could you give us something a little bit more concrete?
Yeah, tell us what the 80% is. Let's start with the 80% that's 100% factual and clearly true. Let's start with that.
What I'm talking about is I am Muslim, and I do.
You're what?
He's Muslim.
The Muslim.
Okay.
I do believe the Quran is the word of God, and I do believe it's actually the only existing proof of God.
Of course you do, because you're Muslim.
And based on what I was telling you, information contained in it, 80% of it, in terms of science, in terms of all that, there's no evidence saying it's wrong. There's no scientific evidence saying it's wrong. I could point out so many different types of archaeological findings, and there's nothing that states that it's wrong. And that's 80% of the book already.
That's not how things work. That's not how things work.
Okay.
There's nothing proving it wrong. You have to prove it right.
Yeah, okay. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Excuse me. I'll give you an example. So, for example, the name Musa, that's the Arabic name for Moses, from the Bible.
All right.
So that name, that's not the same name that's used in Hebrew. Obviously the English is not. It wasn't at that time. So that's only an Arabic name, Musa.
Okay.
And this came in 700, 6th century Arabia, when it came. Right. The name was presented and all that. So the name itself, until recently, people thought it was just an Arabic name. But when they found through Egyptian hieroglyphics, when they were able to find out excavation and all that, they found out Musa means newborn. And this was during a time where the Egyptian language was lost during Muhammad's time and only uncovered recently. So how can somebody know any of that? How can somebody know a name that it would just deem that it turns out to be meaning newborn in Egyptian language? How can somebody?
That's your go-to
divine intervention.
I'm sorry, Jamal.
I'm just saying, give me
that's
Jamal. That's your
Johnny,
go-to. That's your go-to.
Yeah, that's Johnny. You realize that,
but I'm saying that's one.
Okay, all right. Well, you went to it. It's not your go-to, but you went to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you realize that.
I'd love to hear your response to that.
I don't. First of all, I know nothing about the Muslim faith. But what you're pointing to is some miraculous name, I guess, as best I can follow, and there's no other explanation other than every word of the Quran is true, and every word of your given faith ideology is true. You know that every Christian that would call into this show would say the same thing about their faith. How do you answer that?
Well, Dave, before we do that, Dave, I do want to kind of address this point, because I think Jamal thinks he's got a
Gotcha.
he's thrown a shuriken at us, and it's up to us to either get stuck with the shuriken or to slash it
Okay.
with
Go
our
ahead and deal
katanas.
with that then.
Yeah. So a name existed in the Quran that we didn't have evidence for. A
It's never
name.
been used before or
Okay,
something?
you know that language exists and people talk and names. We have an understanding that there's a Proto-Indo-European, and we know from linguistic studies that words tend to morph, transmogrify, and change over geology or geography through cultural groups. And you got Johnny, you got Sean, you got Jan, you got Johan, you got Juan, and all these sort of changes over time. Okay, that cultural groups change and they modify names. And so, even though it might be not written down, it could exist in the oral tradition of naming people names. And the fact that they were able to find a name in hieroglyphics, and the fact that it might exist somewhere in the Quran and exist in other texts from the time is not evidence that the Quran is true. It just is evidence that the people that wrote the Quran down existed in this tableau of languages, living languages that were passing back and forth across the Levant. And that's it. I'm sorry. That's not
Yeah,
miraculous in any way.
that's not going to move the needle much
Sure.
here, Jamal.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sir, let me just clarify, okay? The Egyptian
Okay.
language was lost for
Okay.
thousands of years, okay? Thousands of years.
Cool.
So this is way before Muhammad's time. Way before. It's been already lost for so much before, and it was lost even after, 1,200, 1,300 years after Muhammad died, right?
Okay. I
So,
don't know.
and it means newborn, and it's the name that was given to Moses. It was given to him by his adopted parents.
It's a good name.
So how could he have known that name? And it's just a coincidence. Like, it is just a coincidence that
Yeah.
he just mentioned that name, and all of a sudden,
What if it's a coincidence, Jamal?
At that time, of Moses' time. Think about it. That was that's the name meaning newborn in the Egyptian times. Well, actually, that's not really.
Jamal, do you recognize how terrible this argument is, or do you
No,
actually think this is good?
He doesn't. That's the problem. It's just so.
You could have, but you didn't. You came out with Moses newborn. So what? So what? The people that spoke ancient Egyptian, okay? They did not get wiped off of the face of the earth. They continued. They continued to live in Egypt, and they spread throughout the area. Their language changed. Ancient Egypt became, I don't know, Middle Egypt. Ancient Egyptian became Middle Egyptian, became modern Egyptian. And the people who lived there continued through time. Names, like we have evidence that linguistic traditions continue over the course of thousands of years. You could look up Proto-Indo-European, just for example. You got words like honey and milk and mama and papa and things like that continue. The words mean the same thing, and they change a little bit over time. The fact that the Quran uses a name that existed somewhere on a clay wall or chiseled into limestone, so what, dude? No offense, but like, I know that's very persuasive, and probably your imam, if you have one, use this as evidence for the Quran's accuracy. But it's a trash argument, dude.
It's not compelling at all to
Yeah.
anyone not in that bubble, Jamal. That's
Yeah.
what you need to understand.
You sound like a smart guy, and I think you can do better than that. So, Jamal, why don't you honest?
It's not just that. It's not just that. I want to just
Well-
think about a couple things, okay?
Well,
We
Jamal,
we don't have time. I'm
Jamal,
sorry.
it's nice to want things, and I'll tell you what I want. I want you to call back again, so we can continue this. Call earlier
With a better argument.
with a better argument. Let's skip over Moses, and we really do have to go because we have exhausted the oxygen allotted to us, and we must now
Which
end
is
the show.
science. Oxygen is science, by the way.
Oxygen is science. Oh, but
Yeah.
it's, it's all make believe.